Hey there, Jeff Manchester, Manchester Music. Welcome. In this video, we're continuing the series on why is everyone obsessed or in love with X plugin. And the plugin today that I want to talk about is Ozone from iZotope. I'll be honest, I have been holding off doing this video for some time for two reasons. But before I get into those two reasons, come here. Subscribe. Subscribe to just do it. Just hit the bell too. You get notified when new videos come out. Just do it. Subscribe. Okay. Back out. The two reasons are, number one, the scope of this tool. There are so many modules. It is so comprehensive. It is a fully loaded plugin, and I don't want to do 5-6 parts of this video. We're going to do one. We're going to try to cover everything in one, so I'm just going to swallow it. The second reason I've been a little hesitant is because those following at home over the last 5 years on this channel have maybe noticed that I work for iZotope. I've worked for them 4 or 5 years. And that might be weird to some people. However, I would say that, yeah, I have worked for iZotope for 5 years. I love my job. I love what I do. But 3 of those 5 years, I was a product specialist. So I had to go out and train people on how to use this tool. It means I know a lot about it. So I think that makes me kind of qualified to talk about it from an interesting perspective. And of course, there's no affiliate link. There's no, I mean, you can try it, you can do whatever you want, okay? But there is, I think, a lot of evidence that this tool deserves to be in this series because people are obsessed with it. And also, we're celebrating its 20-year anniversary in the industry, and people have been using this to demystify mastering, to even mix better. It's everywhere. So it really deserves a video in this series, and let's hop to that video right now.
All right. We are looking at the Ozone Pro interface. Now don't worry, everything that I'm going to show you in the Ozone Pro application as of Sunday, October 24th, 2021 can be done in Ozone 9 Advanced. So they are, for all intents and purposes, very, 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 very similar. I'm just using the latest version of Ozone, which happens to be Ozone Pro. I want to talk about how we're going to structure this video. We're going to talk about clusters of processing. There are so many modules in Ozone that for me it makes sense to talk about first all the EQs, all the compressors, all the saturators, and then the bells and whistles, and then talk about some referencing and other features that are perhaps a little understated. I want to first start by talking about this UI though. We can make it smaller, we can make it bigger, and also if you own Ozone Pro or Ozone Advanced, you can break out the modules into component plugins. So for example, if we just want to use the equalizer, I can go into my audio effects here in Logic, go to iZotope, find Ozone, and then either Ozone 9, right, or Ozone Pro, just find the equalizer here and call it up and just use the equalizer. So this is one of the features of having the Pro or Advanced version. And also while we're talking about this stuff, if you have the Advanced version, you can use the Advanced version in standalone mode. So outside of the digital audio workstation, which makes sense if you want to just kind of be in your Zen mode, mastering only, not in a DAW where you have, you know, perhaps the temptation to go back and do some mixing stuff. I prefer to work in standalone, but I happen to be in the DAW for other reasons, which will be more evident later in this video. So those are a couple things that you just need to know. Modules populate left to right. We can add them here with the plus sign. We can rearrange them if we want. We can close out of them. And if we do all the way, it'll tell us to build our mastering chain or use the assistant to get started. And that's actually what I want to start with, the assistant. iZotope is known for intelligent DSP, neural networks, machine learning. The assistant is one example of this technology built in to help give people a starting point. So before we go through all the classes of processing EQs, compressors, limiters, let's start with this guy here. Now, there's 3 steps. We have to choose the kind of sound and modules we want to use as part of our starting point. We have to think about the loudness and EQ, and we have to also give Ozone a sense of where we want our master to end up in the wild on a CD or streaming service. I'm just going to make sure I have the right track selected here, and I'll put it over a point of high energy in this other track here. Awesome. And what I'm going to do is choose modern. Now, if I choose vintage, Ozone will employ vintage inspired modules like the vintage compressor, vintage EQ, vintage limiter to impart a sound on my starting point. If I choose modern, it'll go for the modern EQ, compressor, those kind of things, give you a cleaner digital sound. So let's just choose modern. If I go over here to number 2, I'm being asked, loudness intensity, low, medium, high. This I think corresponds to the LUFS. -11 is pretty hot for high, -12 and -14 here. It'll try to aim for that overall integrated loudness target. Manual or reference. If I choose reference, I can load a reference track into Ozone, and it will try to match the loudness of that track and the EQ profile of that track and impose it onto my source track. We'll talk more about referencing a little bit later though. I'm going to go for manual, and I'm going to go for medium. This track that I'm using, In Bocca al Lupo by Mr. Butler here, thanks to Mr. Butler for giving this to me, already sounds pretty mastered. I think it was pretty close to mastered. So I don't need to go too intense, but I'm showing this for, for demonstration purposes. And we'll choose streaming, because unless we're in Japan or somewhere where CD markets are still popular, we'll choose streaming. So it's asking me here to play the loudest portion of the track. So it's representative of the most, energy. So I put a loop over here. Cool. I'll press next and then play some audio, and the process will get started as soon as the plugin can hear what you're working with. Cool. So you can hear that we had a bit of a loudness bump there. That was the maximizer, aka limiter, kicking in. And now we have to set a vibe for the track. So we chose the kind of modules that we wanted to process the track, modern or vintage. We chose modern. Now we choose a tone that helps get us in the ballpark of a kind of a vibe here. So I'll push this to 175, and let's go through the tone cards and see what they sound like. And of course, we can tweak them after this, but let's go from full to bright. And what this is doing is triggering different processing on the other side of the module that we'll see a little bit later. Let's start with full. So hopefully you're on a good set of monitors or headphones, and you can really understand what's happening sonically as I go through these cards. The differences are fairly subtle. That makes sense for mastering. It's all about micro moves that lead to a great result, as best we can make the track. So don't expect too significant a difference. I'm going to leave it on balanced and press done. And now I'll go over and see what's been done during the listening pass and after I selected that tone card. Bit of a bump here, some subharmonic frequencies, 32 hertz, a high shelf here at 17K. Dynamics turned off. This is our multiband compressor. We'll talk more about this in a moment. But the assistant is also kind of smart enough to know when it needs to not do something. And in this case, it decided not to do any low-end compression with the multiband compressor. Another EQ afterwards, 1 and 2. This one doing a bit of a kind of a bandpass boost here. And then we have a dynamic EQ pulling out what could be some, resonant frequencies so that they don't go into the limiter, which is the maximizer at the final stage here. And it set a ceiling of -1 dB, which makes sense for streaming because there's all kinds of processing that might raise the body of the audio on the other side. So it does this to protect against any kind of, it's a bit like coffee. If you fill your coffee up all the way and leave no room for cream. When it gets to the streaming service and they add the cream, it'll spill over. So we want to make sure we have a little bit of room here for whatever processing might happen afterwards. That's why the -1 was set with the streaming preference that we chose earlier. So this is a starting point. This is how the assistant works. Just for fun, let's go over and choose vintage now, and we'll do the same thing. Same choices. Let's just bring this up. Let's choose bright and see what happens. Cool. So we get the first EQ, surgical EQ, and then we have another digital EQ. We'll talk about this more. Not much was done on this side at all. 0.1 boost. Again, small moves with EQ. The compressor was also disengaged this time. Makes sense. Same song, different module, different compressor, but it was also turned off. Another EQ to brighten things up. A vintage limiter going into the maximizer. So we'll talk more about the vintage limiters and stuff in a moment, but I wanted to give you both flavors of the assistant, and I have. So now let's move on to the first kind of category of tools, which are the equalizers. I'm going to bring them all up here on screen. EQ1, EQ2, we have a dynamic EQ, and then there is a vintage EQ, and finally we have match EQ, and we're going to talk about them all. So this is the first chapter in the EQ kind of portfolio of Ozone. Okay, so first off, this is an 8-band EQ, and I add bands just by hitting the plus button, hitting the plus button, hitting the plus button, hitting the plus button, and now we can't add any more bands. We have the mini heads-up display, which populates here as I click on the individual bands, and we can go in here and change the shape of the filter depending on what we want to do, where we want to go. We have resonant, vintage, backs and all, low pass, high pass, pretty standard stuff, right? This is also a contextual EQ, so if I were to click away from this, bring this up, this is already a shelf, right? And this is already a kind of high pass because it's here at the end. Click these off. If I double click, I can add a node here. If I double click up here, I can add a node there. Of course, depending on where you click in the spectrum, you will have a different shape because again, it's contextual, just like some FabFilter stuff and all that we've done in other videos before. We can also call up this view, which some people might like more. We don't get the heads-up displays here. We get this kind of bird's eye mission control view, which could be beneficial for some people. Maybe it isn't, but that's another way to view and interact with the EQ controls. Standard EQ, we have stereo, we have mid-side, and we have left and right. So that's pretty handy. This is going to be throughout the plugin. We're able to affect just the correlated or decorrelated channels, signals, or left and right, or stereo together. That's pretty common and consistent with most EQs, especially in the mastering realm. We also have the option to go between analog and digital filters, which is kind of nice. I usually hang out with digital when I'm mastering because I want nice and clean and all that stuff. But if you want, you can go the other route and go for analog filters. And if you're using analog filters, you might be concerned about phase shifting and that sort of thing. Go to the options, go to the equalizer, show extra curves, and now you can see the phase response and group delay and phase delay of your moves, especially your kind of broad liberal boosts and cuts. You can see what's happening to the signal down here, which is kind of nice. And if you are working in the digital mode, you can also pivot between 100% or zero phase. This is minimum phase and linear phase. And this is helpful if you find that, you're hearing or encountering as a result of your over the top boosts and cuts, some pre or post ringing. You can bring things down to mitigate some of that ringing or just kind of customize this. This is kind of in the weeds here with the controls, but I thought I'd show you. So that is more or less the EQ. There's a lot to cover, so I don't want to, tarry in one category of plugins or modules over another. We also have the ability to scale the amount with this amount slider here, or bring it down to 0, which which is kind of handy. And if we want to zero things out, just go back to the beginning. We just hit this and boom, we're at the beginning. We've zeroed out all of our moves. So that is the EQ. Pretty simple, pretty standard. We have a second one if we need it. We might want to cut with one and boost with another, or we just might want extra bands, and we can always have these two here. And I should also add that every module, I mean, first of all, this whole plugin is full of presets, and we go here to get the global ones. If you want to get individual module presets, just go here, okay? And you can also preview these in real time. So, second EQ, same as the first one. Dynamic EQ. Now this is interesting. We have a dynamic equalizer. This is to suppress certain frequencies dynamically, have them react and move to what's happening in the spectrum. And we have up and down motion, which is really handy just with these two controls. We can have it kind of react with some upward accentuation, if you will, of certain frequencies. Or suppress. And I should also mention that we are able to, this is really, really nerdy here, but if we want to, we can move around. I don't know why I've gone back to the other EQ, but I can, with my arrows on my keyboard, I'm going down by increments, I think of like, 0.3 dB, or up, or left, or right here, frequency-wise. If I hit shift, I'm going 1 dB. And if I hit shift, so up and down, shift is 1 dB, and left and right, I think this is like 100, or no, 50 hertz left and right. That's kind of helpful. If I hit command, I can make some very fine adjustments here. So I'm holding Apple, up, down, left, right. Some people might like this. And also option will widen or narrow the cue with the left and right arrows. But of course you can do that here like this too, with that little handle, which is handy. Let's go back to dynamic EQ. So let's say we wanted to suppress some energy in this region. Bring that down. We can change the shape, obviously. We can also solo. You can do this in the other EQ as well. Depends on how you like to look for stuff. You can also have this little flashlight option with option click. You can scrub around the frequency spectrum. Just so you know, you can go over here to the cog and you can go to this and change the filter cue. So if I bring this all the way up, actually, I think it's only for this EQ. Yeah, so if I bring this all the way to 0, we have a pretty wide kind of alt solo filter cue all the way up. Very fine. But this isn't available in the dynamic EQ. So we have some pretty helpful controls here. By the way, you can do analog and digital. You can do mid-side, left, right, stereo. I'm just going to keep repeating that for people who are wondering. We have some nice controls here for controlling, how sound gets suppressed here via the threshold. We can change the attack, release. You can do offset here, which is, it'll set a static gain for the band. We also have auto scale, which when enabled, it'll display attack and release values that are scaled based on the band's frequency value. I usually just leave it on. If I have to go, I'll tweak a little bit here, tweak a little bit there, and bring my threshold down as needed. So you could have a couple of these going, right? So I think we have 8 bands here. Oh, no, it's 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, we're limited to 6 bands. That makes sense. And we'll just pull them all back. And that is the dynamic EQ. I don't think we need to spend too much time in there. Next up, we have the vintage EQ. Now, this is based off of the Pultec EQP1A and MEQ5. And it's different, right? Because here we have this parametric, just pull and slide and double click and add these nodes. And here we're kind of back in, I don't know, the 50s or something. And if you want to interact with the EQ in this way, you can. Of course, Pultecs are known for boosting and cutting at the same time. People love that. And you can do that here. And you can do a little mid cut at 1.5K and then a high boost at 8,000 cycles with a high Q and then a high cut and then a high mid boost. So, you can get pretty wild with this thing. And we have mid side and we have left right. I'm just going to keep repeating that. But I really like to go and play with the presets here. Let me just bring this up. Yeah, so this EQ is going to offer a sound way more than these two would, even in analog mode here. Ooh, let's get rid of those. And this is just for people who like vintage style EQ in their mastering chain. And some do, I suppose. I prefer to be as surgical and digital and clean as possible and do a lot of my coloration in mixing. But after all, people use this tool to mix. So why not give them some vintage stuff? Okay. That is the sort of gist of the EQs, dynamic, 1-2, modern, vintage. Let's move on to one of the more interesting EQs in this tool, which is a matching EQ. Very simple to use. I have 2 tracks here in my session, which I will use to get this guy going. So we have one from Dan Leibowitz, and we have our other in Bocca al Lupo. Sorry, Italian people, I keep saying Bocco. It's Bocca. Like, on a camera. That's not funny. Let me get the cycle going. So that's our other track. So let's say we wanted to impose the tonal balance, EQ-wise, of that track onto our track right here. So what I'm going to do is follow the steps here. Number 1, capture the reference. Number 2, apply it. So I'm going to capture the reference of the song that I love. I just have to have its sound, its EQ profile over my track. I'm going to play the track, press capture, and I'm going to wait a little bit to get a really nice kind of, capture of it. Cool, I have it. It's in yellow or orange. And now I'm going to go to a part of my track, which is pretty representative of the overall kind of energy. I'll go to the chorus here. And now I have to capture its spectrum. So I'll press play. Awesome. So in blue, we have our source track. In orange or yellow, we have our reference track. We can see right away some differences. My source track is a little bit brighter here after 10K. My reference track is a little hotter here at around 60 cycles, 70 cycles. So there's some differences, which is nice. But now we have this gray curve, which is kind of cool. This is the composite. This is like the blended curve, and we can fine tune the amount of mapping of one profile onto the other with the smoothing and amount. So the smoothing will determine the amount of precision to apply to the match curve. So higher smoothing is less precise, lower smoothing is more precise. So you'll see as I bring the smoothing down, we get this molds right into, pretty closely the references, it takes into account my apply to and reference curve and kind of very closely matches it. If I bring it up, it gets more diffuse and more kind of wobbly to the point where there's almost nothing going on here. So you'll want to see, what works for you sonically. You'll want to play. We'll do some examples here in a minute. You want to play the sound as you move these around and bring the amount in. The amount will determine the processing intensity to apply when matching the source curve to the target curve. So if I bring this all the way up, that's pretty intense all the way down. But of course that might look kind of crazy, but let's use our ears to determine, exactly what needs to happen. I'll bring this amount up. I'll bring the smoothing. I should double click them to return them to their defaults here. So let's do a little before and after. Let's hit the gain match button, and here's the original kind of profile of my source track. So not super dramatic. These songs aren't that different tonally, but I thought it might be fun to play around. Now here's the really cool thing about this tool is that I can use these action regions to focus the matching on just one portion of the spectrum. So I mentioned earlier, hey, the low end on this reference is a bit hotter than mine. Let's say I like my low end. I don't want to mess with, I don't want to impose the reference's low end onto mine. I can just drag this up and you'll see we're canceling out the composite curve and focusing the matching just on the high end above 1.4 kilohertz. That's really cool. Or we can just impose the matching to, 300 to 2.2K or 2.2 all the way down to 20 hertz. So that's kind of interesting that we can do that. And of course we could save this as, save this snapshot that we captured as a preset, and then we can always call it up in later sessions, etc. So that is a quick and dirty overview of both EQs, dynamic EQ, vintage EQ, and the EQ or the match EQ function in Ozone. Next, what I want to do is move on to the compressors, and we have two of them. We have dynamics, this is our multiband compressor, and we also have the vintage compressor over here. Let's start with dynamics. So as ever, we can go stereo or we can go mid-side, depending on what you like to compress. We also have multiband here. So that means that I can click here, and click here, and salami this up into different portions of the audio of the spectrum. So making our jobs a little easier here is this learn feature, which will automatically settle the bands and portion out the different areas of the spectrum. So I'll just press play and press learn. Pretty standard, right? So I can go over here. This is blue. My controls are blue. I can click here. I get independent controls for this portion in orange or yellow. I just canceled that out. My bad. Click here. Red, red, green, green. You get the picture. We also have the ability to go in and link the bands. So now if I make a move on the threshold and bring this down to minus 24.5 decibels. I've done that for this high region from around 8.4K all the way to 20. As I move to the next band, my minus 24 is mirrored. So this is mirroring all my moves and applying them across all of the bands, which I like to do in mastering situations. Not everyone likes to do it, but I do. Thought I'd call that out. We have limiter, compressor, some parallel functions here. We also have individual kind of band gain to add. And we also have this all view, which is reminiscent of the view that we had in the EQ, which allows us to, at a bird's eye view, just kind of see everything going on right there, which could be handy for you. I'm going to actually disengage this. So I want to focus on these two dials right here. If we leave tooltips on, we can see that this option will automatically have the compressors release adapting to the incoming signal. So you can leave that on or off. And this is your kind of auto makeup gain. So it'll calculate the amount of makeup gain that needs to happen based on what you're doing here. So these are kind of handy little things to leave on if you like to let the machine do the thinking and the working for you. I want to talk a little bit about, oh, by the way, we have peak, RMS, and envelope detection modes down here. Pretty standard, but I might as well call it out in case people are like, hey, what's this for? What's happening over here? I want to talk about these different views, which are handy. So this is the gain reduction trace view. This is a little bit reminiscent of the maximizers view. As the signal scrolls by, we can see the effects of each band on the signal. I have some pretty aggressive, just because I was playing around here. Let me go to a preset analog high end and then go back over here and go to this view. So now we're going to see what's happening in the very, very low end here from 0 to about 100 Hertz in this gain trace view. And if I were to go back and go here, I could see what's happening in that portion of the spectrum in this gain trace view. Here's one of my favorite aspects of any compressor, and especially this one, is the detection filter. This is what you're feeding in to the compressor and what's triggering it. And I think if you care about your low end, you'll employ a high pass or a tilt or something like that here. And I say this because usually the low end is the first thing to really trigger the compressor, and people mix with a lot of low end these days. And so doing this means that the compressor is not going to respond to the low end as much, depending on where you kind of set this point, which means that the compressor won't be working as hard and maybe causing some pumping or some kind of movement that you don't like. Maybe you do like it and keep it on, but going in here and altering what the compressor hears and what triggers it is kind of nice. So I usually will go over here and employ a high pass and just make sure that my low end isn't causing the compressor to work more than it needs to. And usually the low end is always the culprit if you hear some wonkiness in your compression. So that's what that's for. And you can also solo, to hear what's coming in, especially what's coming in after you use one of these filter shapes. Okay, so that's what that does. So very quick and dirty overview. Again, you can solo the module here. You can call up its module specific presets. It's all pretty much up to you. I will say that when I'm mastering, I usually do not do a ton of multiband stuff. And if I do, I will link all the bands so that everything is happening across each slice of frequency. Or I'll just use one kind of plain Jane compressor. Or I won't use compression at all. Depends on what I need to do. But Ozone is pretty feature rich, so you've got a lot of options if you do want to slice things up and go to town and go nuts with the compressor. Let's move on to the vintage compressor, which is sitting right over here. I don't want to spend too much time in here because it's a very simple kind of place to be. We have fewer controls because this is vintage. And we also have these modes, which is really where the action is on this plugin. We have our auto makeup gain. We have some gain we can do manually. We have attack, release, ratio, threshold, and this detection filter. And we have this nice gain trace view. And of course, we can do our processing in stereo or mid-side. So if I mouse over these with tooltips on, we can see little descriptions. Greater emphasis on dynamic transients for a tight percussive sound. Balanced is signal-dependent blend between dynamics and overall body of signal, and smooth is greater emphasis on the body of the signal. So I always tend to go for balanced and smooth. Why don't I just play some audio and I'll cycle through these guys and you can use your ears to see what they sound like and what you like. Anyway, that makes up the two compressors in Ozone, vintage and let's just say modern. Now I want to talk about the next classification of processing, which is exciters, saturators, okay? We have, I would say, three. The first is the exciter module. The second is the vintage tape, okay? And the third, and this might be a bit controversial, is the low-end focus, which is a whole other category of processing, but I think it does something similar to saturation on a spectral level that is, worthy of it being included here in this class of tools. So starting with the exciter, we have 4 bands of configurable saturation with a bunch of modes to really allow you to go in there and customize your sound. We have 2 views. And what I want to do is just kind of hang out here in this main view. I believe this view will roll out high-end, undesirable high-end from getting saturated, which is pretty common. You'll see that on Decapitator. You'll see that on a bunch of other plugins too. I'm going to leave it where it is here because I want everything to be saturated for the sake of this example. I'll get my bands going here. And of course, we can always press learn and it'll set them accordingly for me. As ever, guys, stereo or mid-side. And we have this button here, oversampling. This is going to hit the CPU a little harder than, if you didn't have it on. But what this is going to do is protect against digital distortion, aliasing, which can sometimes happen with saturation plugins. So that's just there. Let's leave it on. And I want to go through each one of these different modes here, and we'll listen and talk through them. But actually what I want to do is go to the other song, which is a little bit better in terms of, candidates for saturation. Awesome. So let's start here. Let's actually zero these bands out. And what I want to do is just have one, and we can hear the overall saturation sound. Let's start with analog, which is the first one. This emulates the sound of transistor type odd harmonics, giving, they say, a driven grit to your audio. And we can blend the amount up like this, and then we can kind of mix in an amount to taste like that. So what I usually do when I'm mastering is I'll leave it like somewhere like around here, like pretty conservative numbers. But let's get a good level going so we can get a good demo level, and then I'll go through all the filters here. The modes, rather. So we're starting to get a lot of toughness. Let's, I'm going to zero these guys out, and let's do a before and after on analog. So some fuzz, some crunch. I'm going a little hog wild, okay, with this, but we're just demoing, okay? Don't write in the comments like, I would never use that. I'm just demoing this. And a lot of people actually use this on mixing, to overdrive guitars and things like that. So that is analog. Retro is the next one up. This is based on the characteristics of transistors, slowly decaying row of odd harmonics. Let's have a listen to that. I'll bring them out in. Again, get yourself some good headphones and have a listen to this before and after. A lot of fuzz, a lot of thump, a lot of pump. By the way, if you want a bit of a cheat code to understand and listen to saturation, excitation, whatever you want to call it, drums. Just listen to the drums. The drums will tell you what's going on. Let's keep moving here to the next one, which is tape. Hey, we know what tape is. It offers a brighter sounding saturation due to the odd harmonics found when saturating analog tape. Let's bring it in. Before and after. A little goes a long way, doesn't it, folks? Let's go next to warm, which is, only even harmonics that decay super quick. Okay, last two, we have our triode and dual triode. These are modeled after tube circuits. Again, drums really give this one away. I love triode and dual triode, but listen to the snare, the punch, the snap. It's pretty awesome. Finish off here with dual triode. Models a full circuit using a vacuum tube, introducing a more pronounced overdrive with a warmer tone. Okay, so a couple more things. Turn the bands on. Boom. We can link the bands like this. So now they all kind of come up or they all go down, which is helpful. Let's move over to vintage tape. I just want to do a quick call out though. These presets are among some of my favorite. If you're going overboard or struggling to know how much saturation to add, these are amazing because they incorporate some mid-side stuff, which is always fun to saturate. So let's turn this off and go over to vintage tape. Now, this is inspired by an A810 2-track Studer tape deck, but it's a lot more than that, obviously, because we're in the digital domain and we can play with stuff and change the IPS, inches per second, right? This is the speed of the tape machine, 7.5. They say adds warmth by emphasizing the signal's low end. 15 adds a distinct body and thickness, and 30 is more subtle. Higher fidelity, lower noise. Let's bring up the input drive and see if we can hear the differences in speed. So listen to the before and after. And again, the drums always give it away. So it's almost like we're squashing them, we're compressing them. It's really impressive. Let's go to 30. Okay, input drive. Higher levels lead to more saturation. Lower input reduce the added saturation in tape emulation. So when we go all the way over here, I mean, this is really supposed to emulate to a degree the non-linearity of tape and saturation. So it gets pretty crazy if we go all the way up. I wouldn't recommend going too high with this. Okay, so the bias. So let's listen to positive and negative bias here. If I go high, this will boost the higher frequencies similar to an underbiased tape machine. Let's move on to harmonics. This will introduce odd harmonic saturation. And if we go above, we have even. Again, drums always give it away. Have a listen. So low emphasis, high emphasis, this controls the shape of the resonant peak. This is sometimes known as head bump in decibels, which adds some gain or a general peak to bass or kick drum material. So if we leave it at 2, which is the default, by the way, double clicking will always return us to the default. This allows a very subtle amount of head bump. Pushing it to higher limits though, can give you low end power. So this here, the high emphasis, this is to compensate for any high frequency loss. Gives your sound some energy. So just one view. We can't do mid-side or anything. We're just hanging out here in one very simple interface. Let's keep moving to low-end focus, okay? So low-end focus is really interesting. This is one of the newer modules in Ozone, and it's become a bit of a favorite I've seen among like producers, like hip hop guys and stuff. And what it does is it will go in and listen to the spectral content. Think about a spectrogram in RX and find the low end spectral information and increase its contrast to everything else. So it's not a shelf. It's not, it's not, unmixing or something like that with music rebalance. It's going in and listening to the spectral information and just increasing the contrast with everything else. And there's 2 modes. All this will make more sense in a minute here. It's just tough to describe this module because the processing is so novel. I think it makes more sense to kind of listen to it. And of course we can go stereo or mid-side here. This action region is like where I'm focusing my processing, which is from 20 to 300 hertz, which is where a lot of, bass and kick drum and snare and that kind of stuff lives. There's 2 modes, okay? Punchy and smooth. Punchy is, in my mind, this accentuates snap of the snare, the thump of the kick, transient information. Smooth, I find, will increase the contrast of more sustain stuff, like a sustained bass note or maybe a sub synth or something happening. And you turn this up and that really kind of accentuates and separates from the rest of the mix and brings the low end into focus, so to speak. So we can increase the contrast or lower the contrast. This is really helpful because if we find that there is too much contrast already between the low end and everything else, we can actually bring it more flush with the rest of the mix. If we find that there's too much, and this is kind of like OX Soothe, where people recording poorly or with bad mics or whatever, we tame the resonance. A lot of stuff has just so much low end, and if we want to de-emphasize it, pulling down the contrast is often very helpful. I'm going to bring up Punchy, and we also have this gain thing here, which allows us to kind of like, make up gain. But I'm going to leave this off and just bring this up for now. Listen for the kick and the snare. And listen when I take it away. The snap of the snare is not so pronounced. And I can solo to see just what's happening over here. So I'm really just getting the bottom of that snare, not so much the top, which is maybe further up here. So let's now go to smooth and listen for the sustained bass note that happens a little bit after this little break and how it kind of comes up in level. And also the sub elements really come out. The sustained sub elements come out too with the smooth engaged with a contrast of 61%. Here it comes, the note. That is low in focus. That's what you would use it for. We have now talked about the saturators, the compressors, the EQs, and the assistant. I want to talk now about the imager, which is one of the most beloved modules in this tool, and also one of the more kind of misunderstood. So the imager allows you to adjust the stereo width of your mix using multiband, of course, stereo imaging, okay? And so I've added some bands. We can also use the learn to position them helpfully. We also have a phase correlation meter as part of a vector scope. There's 3 different ways: lysogist, polar level, and polar sample. And if you ever see this little blue dot trending downward below 0, that's when you know that you might need to rethink your panning structure or be less liberal with your moves. So we will keep an eye on that as we make moves. So we have a couple different ways to see what's happening. I like this view the most to check on phase. So if we were to dip into the red in this trace, that would mean that we need to kind of rethink some of our width choices. Let me see if I can trigger that so it happens. So when those guitars go away and we're just left with drums and everything, we start to get into the red there, which is bad. There's also some information here telling us that we are we're in trouble here. So listen as I go to bring this to mono, how much disappears. So this lets us know that we're in danger here of some bad phase business. So just helpful. Metering is always helpful. Let me close these down. Of course, we can hit this, bring them all up, bring them all down. We can also zero them out up here on the top right. That's super helpful. Let's bring back our little guys over here, and we can bring up the individual width of each band like this. Get out of mono, Jeff. A little bypassing here. So pretty simple. We're just adding width here. We can see that this is 0 correlated to decorrelated, and we can bring that up, and that's helpful. And we can hear and see what's happening. We have the stereoize feature as well, which will add natural sounding stereo width to narrow recordings. And you can also get these 2 different modes, which is helpful. I would stay with mode number 2. It's the newest one. It's better able, I think, to preserve transient information, which often gets kind of smeared as a result of stereoizing. So let me just zero these bands back down, turn this on, and have a listen. Now again, I'm pretty liberal here with the StereoIze feature. So let's look at the trace. So we got to be careful. And by the way, this works, StereoIze works on mono stuff, and should play back without introducing any kind of nasty artifacts. But that is essentially the imager. This is one of the most popular tools in this plugin. If I go over here, I can get some very, very nice presets. Come on now, Logic. When I'm in a submenu and I stop playback in Logic, I get this weird flash on the screen that's like, I don't know what you're doing, stop. So I need to kind of go back and press something in Logic to cancel that out. So anyway, that is the imager. Great on individual instruments, great on a mix or a master in small doses. Now, I want to talk about one of the more futuristic tools, which doesn't really fit into any kind of processing category per se. It's kind of very, very new. And so it's tough to talk about it and slot it into one of the groups. It is music rebalance, which is essentially unmixing. And this allows us to go in and lower or raise the gain by 9 decibels, up or down, of the vocals, the bass, or the drums. It's pretty incredible. It works really well. And it's really nice for people who don't want to bring up or down things with compression, because usually something is sacrificed when you employ dynamics processing to reduce the severity of something, or if you're using EQ, even in a very targeted fashion to bring up the drums or up the vocal, a lot of other stuff is going to come along with it, even if you have a super narrow cue, and that might start to get kind of ringy and bad. So this allows you a very transparent way to raise or lower elements of the mix. And it's also great if you don't have, time to go back and mix it again, but you just want to bring the vocals up, or you just want to bring the bass up. It's pretty amazing. So I'm going to loop things around here in this last section and bring up the vocals and then down, and then the bass and the drums also. And we're going to get this blue trace, which represents the source, the focus, and everything else is kind of the composite view of the track overall.
But you break it, oh, you're wrong. You tried, but you make it. It's hard, I know, but you break it.
In reality, we'd only want to bring this up like one dB or something.
I know, but you break it. But you make it all alone. It's hard, I know, but you break it.
Pretty amazing. Let's do bass now.
I know, but you break it all alone. You try, but you make it.
And the thing that always blows my mind is that it does not bring up the kick drum, the bass, kick bass or whatever. It only brings up the bass synth or bass guitar. We'll hear the kick drum come up in the drum section, but that just always blows me away. It knows the difference between the two. Let's do drums.
It's hard, I know,
That's pretty amazing in my life, I think. Cool. So let's go over to another kind of out of the box piece of dynamics processing that doesn't really fit into what we're talking about. Categories, clean categories, and that's the spectral shaper. Perhaps you could say this is an EQ. It is spectral shaping. This is a, I think, 72 mil spaced kind of compressor equalizer, which gently applies compression across this action region. And why is this important? Well, if you've got a track that is tinny or splashy or sour, especially in the high end, you don't have a de-esser, EQ is a bit too aggressive, use something like this to go in and really tame some harshness. It's pretty transparent, and it allows you a couple different modes. I believe these are the ratios. Light is, let's see here, yeah, 1.5 to 1, 2 to 1, and 4 to 1. Again, this is a compressor of sorts after all, so we have ratios: tone, attack, and release, and the threshold, the point at which the processing starts happening once the signal crosses the threshold. And we can listen to the threshold, which is pretty helpful. So I don't really have a great, let me see if I can add some EQ here just to get things, just to cheat a little bit and add some harshness. So that's pretty, I'm exaggerating a bit of a bump here to bring out the high end of this track to then tame it with the spectral shaper, but here's how it works. Bring the threshold down, I solo to go over the area that has the harshness. That's good there. And now I'll bring this down. Again, this isn't the best candidate, but you get the picture. It's softening things up a little bit. We can control the tone of the shaping, I believe, make it darker or brighter, the attack, the release. We have mid-side processing or stereo processing. I didn't come prepared with an example for this, so please forgive me, but that is what the spectral shaper is all about. A little bit like low-end focus when I talked about too tubby a low end, we can bring this action region down here and tame or soothe some of the low end with some gentle compression with the spectral shaper. So that is what the spectral shaper is for. Okay, let's move on to the next category of processing, which is limiting. So there's two limiters in Ozone, a vintage limiter and then the maximizer. Let's talk first about the vintage limiter. So this limiter is modeled after the Fairchild 670, and it's very simple. We have a couple of bells and whistles, but again, just like the vintage compressor, we have these different modes. And if I mouse over them with my tooltips on, tight bass response for analog, smooth feedback limiter with modern precision for tube, and modern is vintage limiting with increased clarity and presence. Let's get our ceiling going over here. I guess we could do it on this side too, but and go through each one of the modes. Again, it's getting pretty squashy, but again, I have already mastered this track, so we're not going to get a huge benefit, I think, from limiting, but I might as well hang out here in the vintage module. So those are the modes. True peak, what is this? Well, during the D to A conversion, there can sometimes be overages that happen. So when you enable true peak, you're looking at all the digital samples, and the plugin is making an estimation of what the levels might be after the D to A conversion and accounting for that and giving you a sense of, hey, we're going to look at all the peaks. We're going to control all the peaks. So by enabling this, we can get a more accurate representation of what the levels might be after that conversion. The trouble, though, is that this does incur a bit of a CPU hit, okay? So when you turn it on, just be aware, and you can even see my CPU kind of going up as I turn it on, fills up, and then when I turn it off, it goes back down a little bit. So just be aware of that. We have a character slider here, which I believe controls, attack and release times of the limiter, which are also kind of proxied and controlled by these different modes. So that is, in a nutshell, the vintage limiter. Let's go to the Mac Daddy of Ozone, which is the Maximizer. This is, again, one of the most beloved limiters of all time. I think it's safe to say that it's up there with the L2 and other limiters, digital limiters. It's very, very comprehensive. I would say, if you want more information, please read the manual and use this thing yourself. I want to hang out in the modes over here, which are, I think, the thing that attracts people to this tool. IRC stands for Intelligent Release Control. I'm going to describe these guys a little bit and play through them, but there's a lot, and so I don't want to spend this entire time reading and talking. I'd rather spend this time playing stuff back and you guys listening to how these sound. I think that's a more useful thing to do. And because we've already kind of mastered this track, I'm going to go to the other track, which is a little bit more of a candidate for mastering here. So IRC, the first one here, LL stands for low latency. So this is, they say it provides the intelligent digital loudness maximization of IRC1 with lower latency. IRC1 is right over here. So let's bring the threshold down. Let's bring in IRC1, which, if we thumb over it, smooth and thick limiting for a rich sound. And note that I have gain match enabled, guys. This is just so we don't think, oh, it sounds so much better, IRC3 or 4 or whatever, because it sounds louder. No, gain match will match the output and input. So all we're getting is the vibe and character of the IRCs and not the gain jumping up. So please use good headphones or monitors to really understand the sonic differences each IRC imparts on the track. So IRC2 is meant to preserve the transients even more, and it says clear and sharp limiting to preserve peaks. So let's have a listen to that bypassed before and after. One of the things that's coming out to me is just how transparent IRC2 is. I'm really not hearing a huge difference. If you want a difference, there's other modes to choose from, but that is very transparent. And of course, as we move up all of these IRCs, we are going to see the CPU kind of going up because they will, tax the system a little bit more, especially as we go to IRC3 and IRC4 and the different modes within them. Okay, so IRC3, let's mouse over. Surgical limiting tailored to your audio. We have balanced, pumping, and crisp, and clipping. By the way, IRC3 and pumping comes from, I think, Ozone 5. That was one of the legacy presets. So let's listen to pumping. Let's switch over to the next one, balanced. definitely getting a much more open sound when I unbypass and hear that thing. Yeah, crispier. Hopefully you guys are hearing that too. And let's go to clipping. So this is a super aggressive style. You hear that colorization, right? And that distortion. Okay, let's go to IRC4. Starting with modern, they say this provides general enhancement and life to your mix, but with greater detail and clarity than the classic style. Let's do it. Let's go to classic. Actually really like classic. There's a subtle openness there that I like. And let's go over to transient, which is optimized, they say, for maximum preservation of all transients, resulting in a highly detailed overall sound that may benefit some mixes needing added clarity. Let's check it out. So those are the IRCs. We have a ceiling, we have a threshold, we know what a limiter does, we talked about true peak. We also have the attack and release controls, more or less, of the maximizer, which we can control over here. Okay, so I think it would take way more time than I think I want this video to be to talk about stereo independence. Suffice to say that you can control how the limiter behaves with transient or sustained information across the channels by moving this around, and you can also unlink them. I'd say, this is super techy, but use your ears. You might get a louder overall mix at the risk of, a less wide signal, depending on how you manipulate these. But just for the sake of this video, we could spend an entire hour on stereo independence, and I really don't want to. So, okay, so if you want to preserve your transients, while still optimizing for loudness, you'll want to turn this on and adjust the amount. If you go for a higher amount, this will result in more pronounced transients after the limiting process. So for people that are worried about crushing or smashing their transients, this is here almost like a makeup gain emphasis for those transients. I doubt we'll hear too much of a difference if we go before and after, but let's just play with this amount and see if we can get a sonic difference. So before and after. Hearing a bit of something. I'm hearing the snap of the snare a bit more than I am otherwise, but I would say you've got tools to shape the sound of the transients prior to anything, in the limiting stage, like music rebalance or low end focus. So this is maybe an extra thing if you still encounter some smushing or squashing in the maximizer stage. There's one more tool in here called Learn Threshold, which is pretty handy. If we want, we can tell Ozone to dynamically adapt the threshold to a target here, integrated LUFS target. So let's say I want to hit around -9 LUFS. I'll hit play. Press that button. And now this is the threshold setting for us to hit -9 or thereabouts, okay? And then when we export, we know that we're around -9 LUFS. This is not going to be up to broadcast code, so don't use it if you want to hit a certain spec. But let's say we wanted to go really hot, okay? -5. So that's insane, but it's going to dynamically adapt and make sure that we hit -5 when we export and pop it into like waveform stats and RX or something like that. So that just about rounds out the maximizer portion. I want to talk a little bit about what's happening on this panel here, because this panel is also pretty powerful. We have a number of I/O options here. We can change the type of metering from integrated to peak, RMS and peak, Bobcats is K-system, single peak, momentary, integrated, short-term, and max peak. And of course, as we cycle through them, we get different viewing options. I tend to leave it over here at, where do I leave it normally? I think integrated is where I leave it. We also have the option to have the meters tell us, what's happening on the mid side or in the stereo field. That's pretty handy. There's a couple of features down here which are really interesting. So we can replace the input with a reference that we load in, which I want to talk about in a minute. And we can actually show the reference EQ spectrum, which is really handy. So first, let's load a reference into Ozone. So what I'm going to do is find this track by Dan, call it up. And here's a really cool thing that happens. It automatically segments things into these different A, B, A, into using machine learning. It'll go, oh, that's a chorus, that's a verse. And we can draw out the loop points a little bit like this. So let me go back to my other track so this makes a lot more sense. So when I hit this button, we're going to hear the loop that I made, or that Ozone made. There's my other track that's playing in Logic right now. See the playhead moving? I can go over here and play this. So let's say I want to do some referencing and I want to make my track sound like Never You Mind by Dan. I could adjust its gain to make sure it's a bit closer to the gain of my track in Logic. Another thing that might help me adjust that gain is if I knew what the gain of that track was, of Dan's track. I can go here in the I/O, I can go replace input with reference. So now the input is going to be Dan's track, and the output is going to be my loudness. So that's Dan's track. And I can see that it's a little bit hotter. Bring down the gain. So that's pretty handy. So now I can go over here and let's say I wanted to see Dan's spectrum over mine. I can go to the I/O and I can go show reference spectrum. So now I don't really have to hear Dan's song. I can see its spectrum in my EQ. So the spectrum that is hollowed out, that's Dan's track. The one that's full is my track, full and gray. So now I can see both. So that's a pretty handy referencing tool, and I can EQ my track to his or whatever using my eyes and my ears, or I can go over here to the match EQ and do it a bit more automatically. The other thing that I can do now that I have a reference loaded in is go to the assistant and then go, hey, I want you, Ozone, to match the loudness and EQ profile of Dan's track, or take it and impose it onto mine. So I can do that now. So now I can kind of listen to see how they compare. It does sound much brighter, which is awesome. And the loudness is the same. Let's go to the input meter and make sure it is, more or less. Looking at these numbers here, minus 11, minus 12. Minus 14, minus 11. Yeah. Pretty close. Cool. So that makes up the referencing features in Ozone. I want to call out another kind of cool thing. If I click here, I can actually go through all of the moves that I made throughout this entire video and go all the way up to all of my, all the moves. And I can also audition different presets and things. So if I wanted to click on this, bass bus control, I could load that into set A and then load this other preset into set B and just go back and forth to see what these presets sound like. And you can see that it's changing things in real time. So let's hear this, this is a very weird example, but let's hear the all synth bus, and then let's go over to bass DI and see what that sounds like. So I can sample I can load entire preset snapshots. Or if I just want to see what does it sound like when I bring the imager up a little bit, like this, or if I want to bring, all of them in like that, I could load this into set A and then this one into set B and just audition those two things like that, right? So that just about does it. I want to talk a little bit more about these settings over here. We have the reference panel, which we talked about, which is super cool. I think you can bring it in up to 14 or 16 tracks there, which is helpful. We can swap the channels left and right. We can sum to mono. I'm not even going to talk about dithering, but if you're worried about dithering, this is the module for you, and you can go to the documentation and read all about it. But we also have this Codec Preview, which is really handy. So what this allows you to do is preview what's going to happen to your audio once it's truncated from a lossless to lossy process. So going from like wave to MP3 or wave to AAC or AIFF to AAC, what happens is a lot of information is discarded to make that stuff fly around the internet and stream a little faster and slicker and stuff. So you can actually go in and preview what's going to happen and what your sound is going to sound like, and maybe make some moves to compensate for that if that happens to be the case. All the way down to 96 kbps, up to 32 or 320. I'm running out of steam here, guys. Sorry. And you can also solo the artifacts of each kind of format, which is super helpful. So what I'm actually doing right now with these solo artifacts is I'm hearing the data that's lost as a result of the codec conversion. So this is what's lost at 320. If I go all the way down to 96, that's a lot of information that's lost. Listen to how horrible that sounds if we ever get taken down to 96 kbps. And we can actually preview our nice full sound versus the codec bitrate one. Okay, so I think that just about does it for this huge mammoth walkthrough of Ozone. We have global presets here as well. I believe this is undo. We have our history module here. You can go to the settings and you can also click this and you'll be taken to the documentation. I don't want to click it because we'll go out of this video and onto my browser. But this is a deep, deep plugin. I probably didn't even cover everything, but hey, I tried. Thank you, and let's see you on the other side of the DAW. Okay, we did it. What did you think? Do you have it? Are you curious to use it? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you for watching and being here. Like, subscribe, share, all that stuff. And I'll see you in the next one.